They laughed when she walked into the courtroom, this petite woman in a faded sweater. Even the prosecutor couldn't hide his grin, certain this would be routine. As the charges were read, she sat motionless, hands folded on the table, posture steady, eyes forward. She didn't react to the whispers or the sideways glances. Then the doors swung open, and a 4-star general entered, full dress uniform gleaming in the fluorescent light. He crossed the room and saluted her before turning to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "this woman isn't who you think she is." The silence that followed felt heavy, as if everyone sensed the ground shifting beneath them. But before anyone could make sense of the interruption, the courtroom's quiet judgment had already taken root. She didn't look like anyone's idea of a threat. At 5'2" and dressed in a plain sweater and slacks, she could have passed for an accountant or a schoolteacher. The prosecutor's opening remarks dismissed her outright. Just another woman caught in a minor crime. Jurors exchanged glances, their first impressions shaped by her quiet presence and unremarkable appearance. Yet even as the room sized her up, there were subtle signs that something set her apart. She sat with her back straight, hands folded neatly, eyes forward. Her stillness wasn't the nervous kind, no restless fingers, no shifting in her seat. She didn't fidget, didn't whisper to her attorney, didn't let her gaze wander. Instead, she watched, silent, as if waiting for a briefing to begin. A bailiff would later mention her composure, the way she seemed to notice everything without moving, and how it made even the court staff uneasy. Most people in her position would have been anxious, but she gave away nothing. Her attorney, a public defender with a stack of files and a nervous habit of tapping his pen, kept glancing at her, trying to read her expression. He seemed unsettled by her lack of questions or visible concern. The prosecution, confident in their case, barely looked her way, except to point out her supposed overreaction during the incident. The courtroom artist's sketch captured her profile. Soft features, a simple haircut, nothing to suggest a military background. She could have blended into any crowd, and that was part of why so many underestimated her. People murmured about how she didn't look like someone who'd ever worn a uniform. Even the jury whispered about her size, as if that alone defined her capability. She spoke only when required, her answers brief and direct. When the judge asked if she understood the charges, her affirmative was clipped, precise enough to make the court reporter pause. There was no attempt to explain herself, no plea for understanding. She simply acknowledged the facts and waited. Outside the courtroom, courthouse staff noticed she kept to herself during recess, standing quietly near an exit, eyes distant. A janitor later recalled how she stood so still he thought she was lost in thought, but there was a sense she was simply waiting for the next move. Even her daily routines, as described by a neighbor, hinted at something regimented: early morning runs, always at the same time, no matter the weather. The sense of something unspoken grew as the morning wore on. By the time the court recessed for lunch, the quiet curiosity and suspicion in the air had begun to shift. People wondered if there was more to her story than anyone realized, and the facts of the case were about to take on a new weight. The facts of the case looked simple on paper. The incident in the parking lot was categorized as a misdemeanor, an argument over a parking space, a quick escalation, an alleged shove. Witnesses described the defendant as abrupt, her actions out of proportion to the situation. The prosecutor leaned on these accounts, painting her as someone with a short fuse. But as the security footage played, the story began to shift. The video, though grainy, made clear that the other driver, taller, heavier, visibly agitated, advanced on her first. She didn't flinch or step back. Instead, she sidestepped, avoiding contact with a movement that seemed practiced. When he lunged, she redirected his momentum, bringing him to the ground with a hold that looked more clinical than violent. There was no striking, no shouting. She released him as soon as he stopped resisting. The prosecutor insisted this was excessive. Her public defender, flipping through the police file, noticed gaps that didn't fit the routine nature of the charge. Reports left out the other driver's previous arrests for assault. The initial statements were taken only from his friends. When the defense requested the full report, Certain sections were marked as restricted unusual for such a minor case. The defendant herself offered little, answering questions directly but never volunteering information. She watched the proceedings with the same measured calm she'd shown during the incident. The judge pressed the prosecution about the missing details. The arresting officer admitted his report had been shortened at the request of someone higher up. The courtroom shifted at that. Civilian disputes rarely drew such attention. Legal observers began to note the oddities: redacted documents, background checks that triggered security warnings, and database searches that stopped at encrypted screens. Even her driver's license returned with an automated flag when a clerk tried to access more than the basic information. Forensic experts reviewed the footage again, noting how she positioned herself near a structural pillar with clear sightlines. Her movements suggested training, not panic. An expert witness testified that her restraint technique was standard in high-risk environments but rare among civilians. Her testimony remained minimal, her answers clipped and precise. When the prosecutor accused her of paranoia, she replied, "Situational awareness isn't paranoia." Some jurors found her composure unsettling, expecting anxiety where there was none. Her notebook, left on the defense table, contained no personal notes, just timestamps of courtroom procedures and observations about security. The prosecution tried to frame her as unstable, but every interaction pointed to the opposite: steady, deliberate, almost detached. By the third day, the focus shifted from her to the gaps in the case. A paralegal found inconsistencies in the arresting officer's history. Locations listed in his record didn't add up. When questioned, he left the stand abruptly, citing illness. The defendant simply watched him go, smoothing the pages of her notebook, waiting for what would come next. In the gallery, the whispering started to build: quiet conversations, note passing, reporters glancing at each other as they began to sense that the real story was happening just outside the official record. During recess, the gallery's attention shifted from the lawyer's arguments to the quiet figure at the defense table. The whispers started with a local reporter, who kept returning to the way she sat back perfectly straight, hands folded neatly, eyes never drifting. He told a colleague her posture reminded him of soldiers on night watch, alert but unshowy, as if she were waiting for a signal no one else could hear. The bailiffs, without meaning to, found themselves standing taller whenever they passed her. No one said anything about it, but they all felt it. Something about her presence made them adjust, as if discipline radiated outward. Rumors began to circulate when a few veterans started appearing in the gallery, arriving quietly during lunch breaks. They didn't speak to each other or to her, but their arrival didn't go unnoticed. Some sat with arms crossed, scanning the room. Others simply watched the proceedings in silence. By the third day, their numbers had grown. The court clerk recognized a couple from the local VFW, and a reporter spotted a retired colonel she'd once interviewed. No one acknowledged the connection, but the pattern was clear. Word had spread beyond the courthouse walls. Outside, neighbors described her routines to anyone who asked. She left her trailer home each morning at exactly 4:00 a.m., rain or shine, returning by 5:17. The property itself was stripped of anything personal: no mailbox, no internet, no decorations. A neighbor mentioned never seeing visitors, only the steady cadence of early morning footsteps. "Like she was keeping time for something," he said, watching her disappear down the block. The precision of her habits was noted by everyone who paid attention, but no one could say why it mattered. Inside the courthouse, the effect was subtle, but unmistakable. Court staff found themselves unconsciously mirroring her formality. The courtroom sketch artist, asked to capture her likeness, said she barely moved a pose as deliberate as a drill. Even the sound of her chair scraping back at recess seemed measured, never rushed. The whispers grew with each passing day. Some speculated about her past. Others wondered why so many veterans had begun to fill the benches. It was clear to those who watched closely that she carried something unspoken, a history not found in any file the prosecution could produce. Questions about her background grew louder in the hallway and among court staff. The sense of something missing, some record or explanation, hung in the air, waiting for the next round of proceedings to bring it into focus. It started with a simple request: The judge, tired of speculation, asked both sides for the defendant's military records, a routine step in any case involving a veteran. The prosecutor, expecting a straightforward file, promised to produce the paperwork. The defense attorney, already wary, warned that classification might be an issue, but no one expected what came next. The defendant's response was as flat as her expression. Specialist Eleanor Vance, United States Army, active duty 2012 to 2020. She offered nothing more. No unit, no deployments, no commendations. When pressed, she repeated the same 3 lines, her voice even, her eyes fixed on the judge. It was the bare minimum, and it left the room unsettled. The clerk ran the standard checks, searching the usual databases. Nothing came up. No record of training, no medals, not even a discharge summary. The file, when it arrived, was a single page: her name, rank, and dates of service, and little else. There were no details, no assignments, no mention of what she had done or where she had been. The absence was louder than any answer she could have given. For a moment, the courtroom felt smaller, the air thick with questions no one could ask. Spectators shifted in their seats as the prosecutor tried to laugh it off, calling it a bureaucratic glitch. But the laughter faded when a clerk pointed out that even her driver's license and lease application had gaps, lines left blank, fields marked restricted. It wasn't just the military files, it was everything. Every official document seemed to stop short, as if someone had drawn a line no one was allowed to cross. The judge ordered a recess, hoping to clarify the situation. During the break, a bailiff noticed 2 men in suits speaking quietly with the court administrator. They carried the kind of credentials that drew quick glances, but no questions. Their conversation was brief, and when they left, the administrator locked the case file in her desk. Back in session, the prosecution tried to move on, but the room had changed. The defense attorney's hands shook as he slid the thin file across the table. The judge looked at the page, then at the defendant. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of a pen tapping the table. Every eye in the room was on the defendant, waiting for something to break the tension. The sense of anticipation was unmistakable. Something was about to happen, and everyone could feel it, though no one knew what form it would take. That morning, a black SUV pulled into the courthouse parking lot, drawing the attention of reporters and bailiffs stationed near the entrance. The vehicle's windows were tinted, government plates catching the light. The driver stepped out first, scanning the lot, then opened the rear door for a 4-star general. The general's uniform was immaculate, his stars unmistakable even from a distance. Conversation in the lobby faded as he strode inside with a purposeful calm, his presence enough to alter the mood before he reached the courtroom. Inside, the hearing had resumed, the judge reviewing the thin file on the defendant. Spectators and attorneys glanced up as the general entered quietly, his stride measured, his expression composed. The bailiffs straightened, and a few veterans in the gallery sat up a little taller. No introduction was needed. The insignia spoke for itself. The general did not pause at the bar or wait for acknowledgement. He walked directly to the defense table, stopping beside the defendant with a nod of recognition that was neither dramatic nor showy, but unmistakably deliberate. The judge stood, as did the jury, a ripple of silence moving through the room. The general's calm presence seemed to anchor the space. He placed a single folder on the clerk's desk, its cover marked with official seals and redacted lines. He waited for the judge's signal before speaking, his voice steady and clear, carrying easily in the quiet room. No one interrupted. Even the prosecutor, who had been preparing another objection, sat back in his chair, lips pressed together. The defendant, still at parade rest, met the general's gaze with a slight movement, almost imperceptible. The exchange between them was brief, but charged with meaning. The general's focus never wavered, his posture formal but not rigid. He addressed the court with the same composure he might use in a briefing room, every word measured, every gesture deliberate. The effect was immediate. The prosecution's narrative faltered, the jury's attention sharpened, and the room seemed to recalibrate around the general's authority. A few reporters scribbled notes, aware that something significant had shifted. The veterans in the gallery exchanged glances, recognizing the unspoken code in the general's bearing. The judge signaled for the general to proceed, the tension in the room now expectant, every eye fixed on what would be revealed next. General Wyatt faced the bench with a steady gaze. "Your Honor, I intend to clarify Specialist Vance's operational background." The judge nodded once. Wyatt didn't consult notes. His words came out measured, as if he'd repeated them many times before. In 2016, during the Fallujah corridor breach, Specialist Vance established a firing lane under direct fire. She made 12 confirmed sniper kills in less than 5 minutes, allowing my team to extract 4 wounded soldiers. Without her actions, I would not be standing here. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. A court reporter's hands hovered, unsure whether to keep up or just listen. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, but Wyatt pressed on. "Her restraint in the incident you're judging is not only consistent with her training, it's the same discipline that kept my unit alive. In environments where hesitation means casualties, she's learned to act without excess force. What you saw on that security footage was not aggression, it was control." Wyatt placed a single photograph on the clerk's desk. It showed Vance being awarded a medal, the background unmistakably official but the presenter's face obscured. "This is all I'm permitted to share in open court. The rest of her record remains classified for national security." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle across the room. A bailiff coughed, the sound sharp in the stillness. Wyatt turned to the jury. "You've been asked to judge whether Specialist Vance overreacted. I ask you to consider the context in which she was trained. The fact that she used only enough force to stop an aggressor when her skill set allows for much more shows remarkable discipline." The defense attorney swallowed hard. The prosecutor looked down at his notes, silent. In the gallery, a few veterans exchanged glances, recognizing the story for what it was. Vance remained motionless, her hands flat on the table, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't acknowledge the general, but the tension in her shoulders eased just slightly. Wyatt finished quietly. "She saved my life. She's acted with integrity under circumstances most people can't imagine." He stepped back, leaving the photograph and a sealed folder on the bench. For a moment, no one moved. The judge's hand hovered over the folder, uncertain. The sense of recalibration in the room was unmistakable, as if everyone present realized they had misjudged not just the woman at the defense table, but the very nature of the case unfolding before them. The judge lifted the folder, her hands steady, but her eyes scanning the pages with a new wariness. The first sheet held a black and white photograph Specialist Vance at attention, expression unreadable, her uniform crisp. The presenter's face was blurred, but the setting was unmistakable, a room reserved for moments that rarely made it to public record. The judge paused, lips pressed together, as if waiting for some explanation that never came. A classified memo sat on top, stamped with the date from that very morning. It rescinded any previous orders to release further records, effective immediately. The general's brief statement of service was all the court was allowed to see. No details, no list of assignments, just confirmation that Specialist Vance's actions had warranted the highest recognition and that further disclosure was prohibited. The judge's reaction was quiet, but the shift in her demeanor was obvious. She read the words twice, then set the memo aside, her attention fixed on the woman at the defense table. The jurors watched the judge, waiting for a cue. There was no dramatic gasp, no whispered speculation. Instead, there was a steady, growing awareness that the case was no longer what it had seemed. The prosecutor stared at the tabletop, his argument dissolving in the silence. Across the aisle, a court clerk fumbled with her pen, dropping it to the floor and not bothering to pick it up. Medal citations followed, their language stripped of specifics. Redacted paragraphs described actions under sustained enemy fire, and with complete disregard for personal safety. One line, left untouched, read, "Specialist Vance continued the mission despite injuries that would have incapacitated most personnel." The words were clinical, but the implications were clear. A few veterans in the gallery sat straighter, recognizing the pattern. The judge closed the folder, her palm resting on the cover. She looked up, searching for any sign of uncertainty in Vance's expression. There was none. The defendant's face remained calm, her posture unchanged, as if this moment was just another checkpoint to pass. The room settled into a tense quiet. The general did not move. The judge's gaze lingered on the folder, then on Vance, as if weighing what could never be said aloud. In that stillness, something shifted not just in the official record, but in the way everyone present regarded the silent woman at the defense table. What happened next was not in the files. It was written in the way people adjusted their seats, in the way the air changed, in the way the judge's next action would be remembered long after the transcript ended. General Wyatt took a single step forward, then, in a gesture that brought the entire room to a standstill, knelt beside the defense table. The movement was deliberate and unhurried, his knee touching the worn carpet as he bowed his head. It was not a performance or a plea for attention. It was an apology. A four-star general, decorated and commanding, lowering himself in front of the woman whose service had been hidden from the world. The gesture cut through the courtroom's tension more deeply than any words could have. For a long moment, no one spoke. The judge's gavel hovered, forgotten. The bailiffs stood at attention, hands away from their belts. The prosecutor stared ahead, his argument lost somewhere behind his furrowed brow. The jury, silent and still, watched the general's posture and the quiet strength of the defendant beside him. The veterans in the gallery recognized the meaning immediately, a silent acknowledgement of sacrifice and the weight of responsibility carried in uniform. The judge cleared her throat, voice quieter than before. "Specialist Vance, you are dismissed of all charges." Her words were steady, but she avoided meeting anyone's eyes. The clerk's stamp came down, the sound sharp in the hush. The bailiff approached with the keys, his hands careful and respectful. He removed Vance's cuffs with a precision that felt ceremonial, as if aware of the significance. The metal links fell away, and for the first time, the defendant's hands were free. She didn't flex her fingers or rub her wrists. She simply placed her palms flat on the table, posture unchanged, gaze steady. A reporter called out, asking why she had never spoken up, but Vance offered no answer. General Wyatt rose, smoothing his uniform, and replied on her behalf. "Some things are better shown than told." His words echoed in the silent room. The defendant's expression shifted, a trace of recognition passing between her and the general, something private, not meant for the gallery or the cameras. The two left together, their departure unhurried. The bailiffs did not escort them. The veterans in the gallery remained seated, heads bowed. The judge lingered at the bench, eyes fixed on the empty defense table, as if searching for something left behind. As the doors closed behind the general and the specialist, the courtroom remained suspended in quiet. The sound of the cuffs being removed hung in the air, a final note of respect that no one dared disturb. What the courtroom witnessed that day was not just an acquittal, but a quiet hero finally recognized for what she had done. The case was never about a parking lot dispute. It was about a woman whose actions in war had saved lives, whose discipline was mistaken for coldness, and whose silence hid a history the world was never meant to see. General Wyatt's testimony made it clear, you don't put heroes like her in chains, you put them in history books. Greatness often goes unnoticed, especially when it doesn't fit expectations. Have you ever misjudged someone's quiet strength? Share your story in the comments and subscribe for more accounts of courage that deserve to be heard.